If you enjoyed some of the limited horror series from director Mike Flanagan on Netflix, like The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor, I think you're going to be excited to check out Midnight Mass. It comes out this weekend, so are you going to be binging? In a small, isolated island community, existing divisions are amplified by the return of a disgraced young man and the arrival of a charismatic priest. When Father Paul's appearance on Crockett Island coincides with unexplained and seemingly miraculous events, a renewed religious fervor takes hold of the community. But do these miracles come at a price? This is going to be spoiler-free because this is a wild ride of a series, and I want you to be able to experience all of the craziness, suspense, and horror just as I did. The limited series opens on a scene that instantly introduces us to one of the main players for this horror, a character named Riley. And while we don't get an absolute ton on him, we learn that he's going to be a damaged player in the story. The show then jumps ahead a few years to introduce us to this very isolated fishing island community, just out in the middle of nowhere. It's something like 30 miles away from the mainland, so it is completely disconnected for all intents and purposes, save for a daily ferry. The town is tiny, with less than 150 residents, and I find it curious that there were more than a handful of teenagers there. I mean, they're obviously living with their parents, but while this isn't unnatural, it just felt odd that there would be so many in this tiny patch of land right out in the middle of the water. The community is fairly religious too, with a good portion that is devoted to the local parish. Now, the resident priest had fallen ill and taken some time off, so when a new young priest comes to fill in, the townspeople are a little taken aback, but they soon settle in, especially as new wonders begin to occur. I love that this series uses massively long continuous takes. There is more than once that the camera moves around the subjects as they navigate the landscape and deliver the dialogue. And then as characters will interact with new people, the camera will then follow that new interaction, just seamlessly moving along with all of the players. First, it's just an amazing feat to have the scenes play out without mistake, especially because a lot of these are taking place outside, where, elements and nature are completely unpredictable and uncontrollable. But then the actors are so comfortable in their roles that it absolutely comes off as natural conversations and interactions, with us just kind of tagging along as an unspoken third party. Now, there are 7 episodes in this, and each is right at or slightly longer than an hour. So it's a good time investment to binge from start to finish, but I think you'll find the story compelling enough and mysterious enough that you're going to continue from episode to episode without wanting to take a break. A lot of this is a slow burn, but don't take that to mean that it's boring or dragging. I mean, there's an air of anxiety that fills almost all of the scenes. I think it comes about because we feel like we know what's going on, and it appears to be very ominous, but at the same time, we're not exactly sure what the purpose is. Now, for me, I saw what type of horror this was fairly quickly, but what remained as a mystery to me throughout almost the entirety of the series was the endgame. I didn't know what the point or the outcome was going to be. This desire to know really kept me engaged. Well, that and the complex collection of characters were just wildly engaging in their own rights. If you've seen other works by Mike Flanagan, you'll know that he likes to collaborate with certain actors repeatedly. And so 2 that immediately stood out were his wife, Kate Siegel, and Henry Thomas. But the cast as a whole is outstanding. Hamish Linklater was the standout for me. He's the new priest, and he delivers a character that is filled with care, compassion, understanding, and empathy. But we can also see that he's flawed too, which gives him a relatable bent to the character. I mean, he's not so lofty and self-righteous that he's a turnoff, or even holier than thou. He's complicated, which makes him charismatic and mysterious. There's also a character in this that I think you're going to love to hate. They're designed to be complementary to the priest and dissimilar, or maybe even contradictory, all at the same time. The contrast is great, and there were more than a few times that I was muttering to myself about what I thought should happen to the character, and they weren't always nice things. The character interactions are layered, and the relationships build out complexities that work to make for some wonderful story arcs. I also like that we get to see themes explored like grief, disappointment, condemnation, and forgiveness. Now, the special and practical effects are executed really well, and they craft scenarios that are unsettling and disturbing. But again, with that being said, there were a few times where makeup was integral to the story, but the application and what it was trying to accomplish, I felt were really obvious. Now, the imagery is fairly disturbing in this, and even gruesome at times. As we get to the climax, there is more violence that ramps up, but it fits within the context of the story. I mean, it just doesn't come out of nowhere, even though it's pretty wild. Now, for animal lovers, there are a couple of scenes that involve dead or dying animals, and I think one in particular is pretty gnarly and sad to watch, so just be aware. Now, the social commentary that comes from this is pointed and relevant for today, as it examines, at least in small part, the will of the individual versus the will of the masses, and there is also a massive religious aspect to this whole thing. I'm quite certain that it will tweak a lot of people because the story is a religious horror, using religion as the backbone for the horror, but it also twists some concepts and beliefs to make the meanings even more troubling. Now, I found this aspect to be entertaining, but also provoking. I mean, I'm confident in my faith, so it wasn't jarring or even something that makes me question my beliefs, but I can see how the content and message could be off-putting and even uncomfortable for some. So overall, I really enjoyed Midnight Mass. While the elements themselves aren't unique, the way the story is crafted, using a tiny isolated island as the backdrop and then pulling in religious devotion and fervor, works to create a narrative that is horrifying and unsettling. The characters are flawed and layered, working to bring tensions to boiling points. The cinematography and use of long continuous takes develop engaging sequences that pull us into the conversations and the drama. I do think there were a few story elements that are glossed over towards the climax, leaving us to assume actions took place rather than showing us concretely. And I think in these moments there were some opportunities for more drama, but they just weren't explored. If you can stick with the patient storytelling, you are going to be rewarded with some absolute craziness and a pretty satisfying social commentary. Now, I'm going to be talking spoilers this coming weekend on my weekly podcast with Ruben from the Ruby Tuesday, so be sure to check out The Best Thing We Watched this week for that discussion. I mean, there is so much to unpack in this horror show, and I can't wait to discuss it. And then I really hope that you'll join us. There's no sex or nudity, a lot of profanity, and quite a bit of bloody violence. I give Midnight Mass 4.5 out of 5 couches. So are you a fan of Mike Flanagan's work? Do you have a favorite of his? I'd love to know what it is in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.